So I just wanted to start with a passage from your book.
Yeah,
Um, so, and there's a really interesting story in here. In 1979, your daughter was born, right?
yeah,
And to make extra money, you started driving a cab in New York City.
right,
And by this point, you had already played at Carnegie Hall, I think at
right,
least once or
right.
twice. Yeah, with Orpheus.
With Orpheus, yeah, we
Yeah.
started. I started playing with Orpheus in '77, and '78 was our first time, I believe, first official performance of Orpheus in Carnegie Hall, subbing at the last minute for some orchestra who couldn't make it. And from that concert, we got all kinds of offers to go on tour, and then beginning is 1979 is when we really started traveling the world, doing all kinds of concerts, in India and in Israel and Western Europe.
It's
So,
amazing. I mean, and by this point, you played at Carnegie Hall. You'd been involved in Pinnacle projects, the Rudolf Serkin recording, I think by this
right,
point as well.
right,
And so now you're driving a cab and you're part of your route passes Carnegie Hall. And then you write in your book that you were trying to kind of be under the radar. Hopefully nobody would see you driving a cab. I mean,
right.
what did it feel like at that point? And how did you muster up the will to keep going, in music? I mean, how did it feel to be doing that in the first place?
I never thought I had a choice. My dad always told me, you better not stop playing because you can't do anything else.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I guess from that experience when I was a little boy, sitting in the Vienna Philharmonic next to my teacher during opera season, I never forgot the feeling that I had hearing the great sounds and the great emotions being expressed. I just wanted to somehow, some way be a part of it. And I kept going in Curtis, going to Curtis for 4 years. Well, I almost quit at Curtis. I came closer to quitting at Curtis than I did later. And then by 1979, late 1979, early 1980, I had a little girl to provide for. My wife was there and everything, but we needed more money.
Hmm.
So there was no choice, and driving a cab just seemed to be the best thing to do.
So it wasn't quitting music at that point just wasn't an option. There was no plan B. You were going to make it work, but you had to make it work in this other way, to
I,
get the money on the side. Yeah.
right, right. And then within a couple of years, when my wife wanted to take our family and move to Seattle, I guess I'm jumping ahead. I, I, I had already by that time performed with Stockard Channing in The Lady and the Clarinet. I did the concert with Yehudi Menuhin, the Bartok contrasts. Um, just Yehudi Menuhin, me, and the pianist Georgi Sandor,
Hmm.
and big concert celebrating Joseph Szigeti. 10 years, I think, since he had passed. But, these were collaborators of Bartok. And so here I am playing, and I ended up leaving all of that. And I also was starting to play with Orpheus, 79, 80. I left and went to Seattle with my wife and daughter because I wanted to keep our family together. So I could not imagine quitting music in the beginning, driving a cab part time. But then within a few years, I realized that for me, I needed to try to do everything possible to keep my family together. So I left New York, effectively quitting music for a year to do other things, to sell welding rod, to do, all kinds of different things just to keep. It's a miracle, really. I think I've said it in the book. It was a really unlikely path to become the success that I had. It was just really very, very unlikely
Definitely,
for a lot of
definitely.
reasons. Yeah.
I mean, what gave you the will to push through during those periods where, I'm not making it in music I mean, I'm not paying the bills through music, and it's a difficult thing because the career path you chose was chamber music based. That's always more difficult. But I
Yeah.
mean, what gave you the will? Did you just have a belief that, I'm meant to be here to make music and that gave you the will to push through?
I guess I felt like something special was going to happen to me. I guess when I was 12, I thought, my God, I mean, I could have been, I mean, the equivalent for me, I was more interested in baseball at the time. It would have been like, suddenly I'm a bat boy for the New York Yankees. I mean, it was like, wow, looking around and the great conductors and everything. And that happened to me. And then I got into Curtis, and then at Curtis playing, and sometimes Eugene Ormandy and Istvan Kertész and people were in the audience, and wow, you did great, and then Mr. Serkin invited me to Marlborough. So I guess I felt like there was something in store. There was something in store someplace somehow for me. I almost quit when I went with my girlfriend Emily to Europe. I mean, I almost quit then too because I didn't want to leave her there, but there was nothing for me to do in Basel where she was singing. There was nothing for me to do there, so I had to leave.
So you
But
just had a belief that I'm meant
yeah,
for this in a way, just to,
I had a belief that
yeah.
enough things had already happened and there had to be a reason.
Hmm.
There had to be some kind of reason, and I loved it so much. And people seemed, on first glance, when they first would hear me like in an orchestra audition, I didn't do well. But I mean, after people heard me a few times, they said, "Hey, you know what's kind of nice," and I don't know, they kept me around, and so I stuck.
Yeah, so there was a reason that you were in Vienna studying with Professor Yedel. There was a reason that you went to Curtis. It was all for a reason. So that you had that
It
momentum behind you, and
seemed
yeah.
to be, yeah.
Hmm.
But Curtis
Yeah.
was, that was another reason that my career. I mean, who goes into music to play chamber music as a clarinetist or a bassoonist? I
Hmm.
mean, you want to get an orchestra job, and so when you go to a conservatory, you're expecting to be trained to really do well in an orchestra position. But at that time, when I went to Curtis, I guess 1967, that was the worst possible time for at least a wind player to go to Curtis because that was Zimbalist's last year. Ephraim Zimbalist was he was the director, I guess, for a few decades, and his thing was the string players should stay home and practice their concerti. So the orchestra was made up of full winds and brass to play on Heldenleben, and you'd have three cellos and a violin and a viola and a bass, and that was it. I mean, so, and no mock auditions, zero, nothing,
So it was
no.
just solo
And
based, basically soloist based. It was
yeah,
soloist
it
based.
was solo chamber music. So
Hmm.
anyway, it wasn't
So
practical
they
in
weren't preparing
that
you
sense.
for preparing you for an orchestra career.
No, not at all. Chamber music was fabulous. And today, of course, the Curtis Orchestra is all over the place, like it used to be in the 30s under Reiner.
Hmm.
But now it's great. But when I went there, it was great for chamber music, and that's how I got into Marlborough. I mean, Mr. Serkin was the director of Curtis, became the director. He liked me, invited me to play with him, ultimately record with him, and he was the director of Marlborough.
Hmm.
So that's how I was able to kind of climb the ladder, and that helped me. Of course, that was the crowd to be with in New York. The machers, as we say in New York regarding chamber music, were basically largely through Marlborough and the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and a lot of that was interspersed.
Yeah,
So
amazing. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, just backing up a little bit. So in 1961, you were how old? 14, about?
61,
Yeah,
and
1961.
I was born in 49, so I was 12.
Oh, 12. And so
Yeah,
this is when your dad decided to take a sabbatical, and you all went to Europe for a year,
yeah,
for exactly 1 year.
yeah.
And you made your way to Vienna, and your dad had the temerity or the forthrightness to go talk to Professor
He
Rudolf
called him
Yedel.
up.
Yeah, he
Called
called
him
him
up
up.
on the phone. Professor Yedel, Wiener Philharmoniker. His title was in the phone book,
He
and
was in the phone book.
yeah, and that's a big deal in Vienna to be in the Vienna Philharmonic. It's a big deal.
Hmm.
It's maybe bigger than being a doctor.
Yeah. So this is one of the most famous clarinet players in the world, or most
I,
storied clarinet players, and your dad just called him up. Can you teach my 12-year-old
yeah,
son?
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was into it because they didn't make very much money. I went over to his house, and it was Today, there's a plaque in front of the building, which is a little bit dilapidated, and the place is still, I'm even much more probably dark and dingy. But this is not a guy that made a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was, and he loved Americans. He and his wife loved Americans. Told me many stories about the war. Ultimately, we became very close because, as you know in the book, I was there when I was 12. I was there in my 20s. I was there in my 30s and 40s, too. So we had quite a relationship.
So what did he work with you on at that point? Where were you? What kind of exercises was he giving you? What was he talking about in lessons?
When I was 12.
Yeah.
Well, he listened to me for a long time. I remember when I played for him the first time, and he wanted to hear me play fast. He wanted to hear me play slow, the Adagio from Mozart Clarinet Concerto, and then he wanted me to sight read. He had things, he was a composer, very active composer. He was a jazz saxophonist. He had his own jazz band. He wrote music for that, and then he wrote etudes. And so he wanted me also to sight read, and so he was impressed when it came time for us to go on with our travels. We went to Israel after Vienna, and I was bar mitzvahed in this Orthodox town in Israel, Bnei Brak. But he fixed it so that I had an Austrian grant to stay with him and his wife when I was 12, and decided against it. But
Yeah.
and who knows what would have happened if I'd stayed. But what did he ask me to do? He asked me, technical exercises, these chromatic major and minor thirds. You know what I'm talking about. A lot of different exercises, kind of atonal sometimes at the time.
Was he really into practicing? You have to practice a certain amount of hours per day. Did he really stress that?
I think so. I think he was very different than later on in my life. I studied with Mitchell Lurie, who told me one point that a talented musician should never have to practice, a clarinetist anyway, should never have to practice more than an hour a day. That's it. And I thought, well, I spend more than an hour a day. I spend way more time on reeds than I did practicing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but he was into work. He was a craftsman, and so he had everything down. He made everything from the tubes and like a bassoonist. Although some bassoonists now I understand, like oboists and clarinetists, can buy reeds that are pre-made certainly, but also not even use the Arundodonx. So
Exactly, the synthetic.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
into that now, right? The
I
synthetic
am.
reed. Yeah. Yeah. So and another amazing thing that happened to you when you were 12 is your teacher asked you to sit in the pit with him to turn
Yeah.
pages, correct?
Yeah.
So you were in the pit of the Vienna the Vienna Staatsoper, turning pages, listening to the instrumentals.
Ostensibly, I wasn't really turning the pages. I maybe could have, but I was sitting there in the section
Yeah.
with him and the orchestra, and they do that, I guess, with very young, talented students, because man, if that doesn't get you
I know.
just completely in love with the idea of making music, I mean, nothing will.
Yeah, so you saw that and that stuck with you for life. I mean, those experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's an
Absolutely.
incredible base to start. So you were there, and yeah, another thing that you write in your book was one thing that you learned from this period was thinking big. And I thought that was very striking. So that kind of set you up in terms of expectations, things that you expect for yourself in your career. Can you talk a little bit about that? Thinking big, this idea of thinking big and expecting great things for yourself?
I think my dad helped me by, I mean, you think anything is possible, anything is possible. So you end up saying, well, why not me? Why not me? Before you go out to play, why not me? Why not? And just different people. When I was selling welding rod, my boss, he He made a bad welding rod. He made welding rods that I sold to many companies who ultimately wanted their money back because the product was not very good. But he instilled in me this idea, this kind of ethic that allow yourself, he said, David, allow yourself to be successful. Allow yourself to be, so often we're brought down by negative thoughts. You can have them and then kind of dismiss them as what they are. That goes into this score thing that I have mapped out. But, just allow things to go well for yourself.
So don't get in your own way.
Don't get in your own way. Don't put yourself down. Prepare. And then just allow things to go well for yourself. Heifetz said, practice like your life depends on it. Perform like you're at a party. And so that I mean, it's easy to say, but I was selling welding rod, and he gave me the idea that you can do this. You can say, and I ended up doing very well. Sometimes I had to do extraordinary methods to sell the product, but and so being in Carnegie Hall, well, it wasn't that different than sitting in the Staatsoper in the Vienna Philharmonic, except, yeah, I was playing, but I don't know, it was just, I was able to do that. My sister is a little bit different, so she got a job right away, a playing job, and she was in San Antonio Symphony and Oregon Symphony almost 50 years, had a nice career, but she didn't want to. She wasn't so ambitious. She just wanted to play, and that was great. I was ambitious. I had to be. I didn't have a regular job until I was 40. Mm-hmm. When I got my job as a professor. So
yeah, so you didn't have a cap on yourself in terms of what you believed was possible. Like there was no cap. It was just things possible. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's amazing. And one other thing from your Vienna period that you read in your book, it's you talked about, being in the pit, listening to the operas, and gearing your sound around opera, this singing idea to sing through your instrument. And when I listen to you play, I hear that. I hear this, you're almost singing through the clarinet like an opera singer would. Talk about that a little bit, this idea of an opera-based approach to music.
To me, that's the most pure way of expressing music through singing it. Whether you're going to be ultimately playing it on the tuba or whatever it is, it's a voice. We all have a voice, and thinking of it in terms of a lyrical way, it helps me understand what the composer wants and just to kind of get inside the music a little bit better by thinking of it in terms of singing. My biggest influence is when I was going to Curtis and before, I was supposed to be listening to how clarinetists played Brahms' third, or what. I never did that. I didn't want. I heard clarinetists, and I remember Robert Marcellus. We all loved his sound, and everyone just, and I did too. And I went to Chicago when he was at Northwestern and studied with him. And he was a wonderful musician and great clarinetist. But I didn't love listening to clarinetists in those days. Today, Sabina Meyer, there are many wonderful clarinetists. The guy in Berlin, I keep forgetting his name, has all these recordings with Deutsche Grammophon. Just a great player. But in those days, it didn't interest me. I loved listening to Mark Lifshitz, wonderful lyrical oboist from the Cleveland Orchestra. But my connection to music came, I think, from when I was 12 years old, listening to those great singers. And then when I went back in my 20s, I could go to the Stehplatz, way at the very top of the theater for, I guess, about $2, and stand through operas, and I just loved listening to the great singers, Liliana Kotrubas. I mean, there were so many that went through Vienna, and that's what I kept with me still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and you can hear that when you play,
Oh,
definitely,
thank you.
in your recordings. Actually, I heard a couple weeks ago, I heard you on the radio, the Symphony Concertante recording with Orpheus. Yeah, and I noticed that in your sound. It's just a very singing sound. It's vocal, it was beautiful. So
Thank you.
yeah,
Thanks.
I'm sure you hear that from time to time on the radio, right? You hear that
I hear
recording.
that when I hear something we did with Jonathan Biss, one of the Mozart piano concertos that have really some nice clarinet solos in the slow movement that I got to play. Mozart serenades, Dvorak serenade, Grand Partita. Um, yeah, we did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. So when you hear a recording yourself, in some cases these are recorded decades ago, right? Two,
Yeah,
3 decades ago. I mean,
yeah.
what is that like to hear yourself on the radio? Do you enjoy listening to yourself? Do you listen for things you could have done better? Is it a
Oh,
painful
sure.
process, or is it?
I have a room full of recordings.
Uh-huh.
So I sit in there mostly to watch baseball games, but I can look to my right and I see all these yellow CDs on a bookshelf, and from Deutsche Grammophon. And
Hmm.
my wife listens; she loves to listen, and so we'll listen, and then I can, oh, I was late here, and this wasn't clear, or that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, anyway, when you listen to recordings of yourself, you're listening for you can't help but hear the imperfections sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. It's hard to listen sometimes to classical music just in general because I can't, whether it's, Orpheus or me playing with Mr. Serkin or whatever, um, or not me, but I mean, we do listen, but yeah, it's not always so easy. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's just part of it.
is that
Yeah.
the way it is with you too?
Yeah, definitely. But I
Yeah.
think it's just part of natural. It's the part of it where it comes out of your head and you listen to yourself inside your head differently than externally, and so you hear
Right.
yourself. Yeah, it's a whole different thing. But yeah, I just wanted to ask you when you went to Curtis. So you went to Curtis at age 18, correct? Yeah.
Right. I was a little older. I mean, when I went to Europe for a year, I ended up, when we came back, I ended up a half a year behind my classmates that I had had before. So I skipped a year of school, but I came back um, advancing a half a year instead of advancing the year.
Hmm.
So I was born in April, and I started. I guess I was my 18th birthday was in April. Um, when was it? Have been 19th. Let's see. It was a 49, 59s. Whenever I went to Curtis, I think I went to Curtis. I graduated in '67, so I was 18. Yeah.
18, yeah. So you were there in 67. So I mean, that's I'm sure Curtis back then was a lot different from how it is now. You had a lot of these old school players, people that had been in the Philadelphia Orchestra for a long time, people that had been around since 30s, 40s, maybe. Can you talk about the differences between what it was like back then at Curtis versus now in terms of teaching methods? Were the teachers really tough on students back then compared to now?
I remember John Delancey, our woodwind teacher, the principal oboist of the Philly Orchestra, and I admired him. He was always the first one on stage and the last one to leave. Um, I remember, I think I'm remembering this right. He told a student once, probably about a month or two after he had accepted him as a student, he said, the best you're gonna be able to hope to attain is to be third oboe, second oboe in a third-rate orchestra, and I don't want to teach you any longer. And he was the only oboe teacher in the school. So the kid was crushed, but in the long run, maybe, who knows? He ended up, he could have been done something, I don't, way more important than playing the oboe. I don't know,
Yeah, he might have saved him decades of heartache,
He was
Yeah.
tough. He was tough. Um, I can tell you that, like I was saying there was nothing, no excerpts, no orchestral excerpts, nothing. And our etudes were really from the 40s, 1940s, nothing. So and it didn't change a whole lot, except that once Mr. Serkin came, then the Guarneri Quartet was there, and then members of the Budapest Quartet were there, and the Beaux-Arts Trio were there, and then we had fantastic chamber music experiences. I was in a group with Michael Tree, a group. We didn't have a name, but I used to play concerts with Michael Tree, Michael Tree, and a pianist. And we would do Bartok contrast, Bruch pieces. And I was in a group with the violists of the Guarneri Quartet. I mean, and I was a kid in school. I was playing sonatas, a movement at a time with Mr. Serkin when I was, young, because they were there and they liked what I was doing and they were encouraging me. And so it was a great place to be for chamber music. It was great.
Yeah. Were you encouraged to practice several hours per day? I feel like that's kind of a difference between now and back then. People practiced more maybe. I think now it's less about, that sheer amount of hours, but
we just did it. There was nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it. When I came to Curtis, I grew up here in Southern California. So I played, I practiced, but I also was outside. I was doing other things, and at Curtis, it was awful. One of the stories in my book, I don't know if you recall, it was a big fire. I was practicing. I was just so discouraged. I was so unhappy, being, nothing to do with practice. And that was the closest I ever came to quitting. Big bang at the door, fire marshal, get out, there's a fire. And I just thought for a minute, I was just practicing, and I took my clarinets and I put them on the floor. It was open, didn't even put them away. Mm-hmm. And I left the house and went to the other side of town. My friend, his name is Abe Weiss. I don't know if you know who, he's brother of David Weiss. He played principal in Rochester.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went to Abe's house, and you hear the fire trucks, and all day, and you're smelling the smoke and everything. I come back at the end of the day, the half of the block was broken windows and black soot and smoke coming out. And I walk into my apartment. It was a brownstone. I was on the bottom floor, and there are my clarinets sitting in the middle of the floor, untouched.
Yeah. Wow.
And there it is. So
yeah, providential. There's another story you mentioned in your book about this friend that you made at Music Academy. I think Jimmy Fields.
Yeah.
Jimmy Fields. Yeah, and he went to Curtis with you.
Yeah.
And this was a prodigy type figure, right? He just had this kind of natural talent, but he flamed out. He flamed out early. And you write in your book, maybe it's not the best thing to be a prodigy because, there's a lot of pressure on you, and the fact that maybe it's better to kind of work your way through and kind of have to go through those trials. I mean, what do you feel about that?
What I saw, I mean, Jimmy was one of the most talented kids that anybody saw from LA. I mean, Jimmy was working, Jimmy knew Walt Disney. Walt Disney wrote him cards, and it was, he was involved in television when he was a kid, 9, 10. He was the Mouseketeer. He was in the Rifleman, the Ann Sothern Show. Jimmy was like this wunderkind, and he could sit down at any gathering from the time he was a kid and just start playing Chopin, and everyone was just kind of, it's Mozart. It's come back to life. And so Jimmy was someone who didn't like to practice, by the way. He never liked to practice. So when I knew him at the Music Academy, he was just, if he felt like going to San Francisco, which is 6-hour drive each way, Dave, you want to go to San Francisco? You mean next week? No, no, right now. We're gonna go. So we go in the car
Yeah.
and drive around, have a great meal, and then come back. Jimmy was full of fun and laughs, and he could show up and play fantastically well certain pieces. Rhapsody on a Theme, Paganini, Rachmaninoff, one of them. Nobody could play it like him. Still, I think. And then yeah, and then he ended up not doing great. He played with the LA Phil many times, but as he got older and he went to Curtis, and then I was his roommate, he didn't like to practice, like I say, and he I don't know, he just it didn't work out for him. It didn't
Was
work
it the
out.
lack of discipline, or was it the expectations placed upon him?
It's like he reached a certain point and he just couldn't get better. And what happens is when you impress people and you're 12 and 15, well, by the time you're 18, they're hearing you again, and they're expecting more. And when you're 20, then there are others. That must be the hardest thing to do to make it as a musician, as a pianist and solo. I mean, it's just crazy. But that's what he thought he was going to be doing, and it didn't work out for him.
So maybe it was just too easy for him, and he didn't have to go through the steps that people normally have to go through, and that's why it
He
kind
didn't have the time to
yeah.
build what he needed to build, and you can't just play one piece and wow everyone. You can wow them once or twice, but you have to continue to wow them as you get older, and then it's a different level, it's a different standard that you're held to.
Yeah, so he maxed out his talent basically, and then when the inspiration left and the hard work had to come in, it didn't happen for him. Yeah, it's yeah, that's fascinating. And so after that point, after Curtis, you went over to Europe, and you talk about in your book the Geneva competition
Right.
took place in, and not getting past the first round. And those of us that have not been past the first round, it's happened to me several times. It's a devastating feeling. You feel worthless in a way, at least I do, sometimes. How do you move past that? How do you deal with that and then move past it?
Wasn't to be.
Yeah.
That wasn't the thing. What did I learn from it? You know, on to the next thing. I was
Mm.
on my way to Vienna. I was seeing my girlfriend. I was going to be seeing Professor Yettel again, and had a lot to look forward to, and just on with things.
So you didn't take it personally, you didn't let it stay with you, you just
I
moved
was
on.
sad and I was depressed, but at the same time, I just didn't. I just thought, okay, that was the time when um, I met someone whose name was Vladimir Pikulian, who was a brilliant guy, who was a masterful chess player. He was an engineer, but he was in Geneva working in a car wash. He was an engineer from Russia, but he left illegally. He didn't have any papers and was waiting for his papers to come so he could emigrate. He ultimately did emigrate to Canada, but I don't know. I guess I just thought there was going to be another way.
Hmm.
I would have another way to show what I could do.
Hmm. So you didn't let it shake your belief, you just kept going. Yeah.
Although basically being in Europe in my 20s was a humbling experience because I was also at the Munich Festival. I auditioned for the Volksoper, and nothing worked for
Hmm.
me. That
Yeah.
was demoralizing after the Volksoper.
Yeah.
And then I auditioned where my girlfriend Emily got a job in Basel. They needed a principal clarinetist. And I called the conductor. I was able to communicate with the conductor. I told him what to Curtis, and he said, "Of course you can come and audition." And then I didn't get it,
Hmm.
and that was bad. That was not so easy. And then
Just
ultimately I had to
hard.
leave. That was devastating. And coming to the United States, back to the United States, I was like, I guess thinking about it now, it would be the equivalent of having gone a few rounds against Mike Tyson in the early days when he was a great boxer, or Muhammad Ali. I mean, just I felt like I was, just being, pummeled from all different directions, and I didn't know what was going to happen then. That was very, very discouraging.
Yeah, so that at that point when you didn't get the Basel job, you'd been in Europe for 2 years or 3 years?
About just over a year.
Oh, just over a year. Okay, so you went back to Vienna for a year.
Yeah.
And then yeah. So I mean, yeah, you write about in your book, you knew you had to move on. You went back, and that's a very difficult decision because you're leaving your girlfriend behind, you're leaving potential opportunities behind. I mean, how do you know when you need to move on? Because I think a lot of people would have just stuck it out. I'm going to try to make it here. I'm just going to stay in Basel, see what
Some
happens.
did.
Yeah.
Some did. But by that time, I had already recorded with Rudolf Serkin a sonata. I'd been at Marlborough for several summers. I guess I had indications enough to realize to get a hold of myself, and was that going to happen here in Europe? Was that going to happen? Likelihood was that nothing much was going to happen for me there anymore. So, I talk about taking stock, having quiet time, praying. I mean, where should I go? What should I do? And after a while, it was clear what I should do.
So you literally prayed on it, and you
Yeah.
thought about it for a long time, and then the answer was just kind of beamed into you, like, this is what I
That
need.
happened at different points. That was a big one. It was very hard to know what to do when my wife wanted to move from New York to Seattle, and I was just starting to play, like I said, with Orpheus. I was doing things. I'd just done that play for a couple of months with Stockard Channing, played with Menuhin, and I was going to take myself away from that and go to Seattle, where the only way I could make money was doing other things. But it ended up being a very good decision, because when I created this program called Music Magic, I don't know if you remember that,
Yeah, yeah,
but putting a program together and then implementing it in the community and having different schools respond, and then doing it again in New York, that was what enabled me ultimately to fight for custody of my daughter and win and take her with me, because I had a skill that I could do while she was in school. And when I ultimately had my interview as for professor at the State University, now I don't know if they've ever had a professor who didn't have a bachelor's degree. But I implemented a program. They had a big problem with recruitment. Their music department was basically a ghost town. It was nobody there, and very, very few students. But I showed them that I had the energy and I had the wits about me to know how to get students through chamber music, giving students more activities to do, different things that I started at the school. I entered in 1989 as an assistant professor, and by 2012, we had a huge building in the beginning. I'm not saying I did it all, but I was credited as being part of the real success story of the music department at Montclair State University in New Jersey. And so, even being the only person there, and on the campus, on the faculty, without a bachelor's degree,
yeah.
but somehow, and that was unlikely. But my playing with Orpheus, making recordings, that all helped as well. But that the music magic that I created in Seattle and then did it in New York, that also played a role in it. And so it's all part of this. Like, it's almost as if it was meant to be, even though it was unlikely.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because being in Seattle at that point, you're forced to almost be out of music, and you're selling
Absolutely, I
welding products.
was.
Yeah, and so it's kind of a low point for you, or a relative low point for you. But you, during that point, during that period created a program that set you up for your entire career because he got you the Montclair State University job, and then it's like, so that's just fascinating that you can your lowest point can be something that sets you up for the future for decades. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah. Amazing. So yeah, I mean, it puts things in perspective, right? I mean, yeah.
What
Yeah.
you're doing right now with what you're doing is, you'd be, who knows where
Who knows? Who
where it's
knows?
leading. It's absolutely, and then
Yeah.
where you can then do what you want to do. You don't have to, just whatever. You can write
Exactly.
a ticket.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what happens, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you about old school Vienna because when you went back to Vienna, this was 1971 or about that
Uh,
point or seven.
Actually, let's see, I graduated, I graduated from Curtis 71, 72. So it was probably the 72, 73, and a little bit longer academic year that I was in Europe.
So you went to the Hochschule for a year
Hochschule für
in
Musik.
Vienna.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this was at a point where there was still a lot of old people in the Vienna Phil from the 30s and 40s, and I remember
From the
talking to you
war.
about yeah, I remember talking to you about this. There were old Nazis in the orchestra.
Carl Oldberger,
Yeah.
unfortunately, such a sweet man.
Uh-huh.
Oh, such a sweet man. And I told Professor Yettel, oh, what a sweet guy. And Yettel looked at me. Can you imagine? He was sitting next to Professor Oldberger during the war. And I'm not sure if it was him, but there were others in the orchestra saying, hey, anytime you want to get rid of your wife, just let us know. She was Jewish, and so they were gonna, and he's sitting next to these people playing Mahler and Brahms with them, and so anyway,
So you must have heard a lot of crazy stories about
I
that
heard a
period.
lot of crazy stories, and from my relatives, my Orthodox relatives in Vienna, they told me about Professor Yettel as being a hero to many Jews, helping them escape during what they call the Anschluss.
Yeah, and how did he do that again? It was what was his process for saving people during that point?
I don't know exactly, except that he used his position in order to obtain sometimes paperwork, or sometimes I'm not sure he could. Who know? I don't know exactly. I don't know if he drove them in his car to Switzerland, but he was punished for helping Jews escape, and by the Vienna Philharmonic, actually kicked out of the orchestra, and it was Furtwängler who helped him get back in. So the same orchestra that kicked him out for helping Jews honored him decades later with the Austrian Medal of Freedom, which is one of the biggest awards that any civilian could get for helping Jews escape. And today there's a plaque with his name on it in the Vienna Philharmonic Museum honoring him. This is the same organization that kicked him out and would have done terrible things to his wife, the worst things. And so it's,
So he saved his wife by being in the position that he was in,
yeah.
basically. They wouldn't touch his wife. Yeah. So another thing you talk about being in Vienna is learning proper breath control from watching singers. Can you talk about what a proper breath is?
It was explained to me that it's what happens before the sound comes out that's important. And it
Mm.
was related to me because I'm such a sports freak that if you're going to throw a ball, it's what happens, what's how you juxtapose your body and what you do before the ball leaves your hand, or swinging a bat, or whatever it is, or singing. Before you sing, there was this book called Zen and the Art of Archery. Do you know that book?
Yeah, great.
Guy named Watt or something. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, whatever. Well, the art of archery, it involves this kind of thing where so this is very important. It's not just the aim, is of course, but so when you're singing, it's you watch them take their breath, and so that's very, very important. Um, I find with young people, they don't know how to breathe, and they're breathing, with their shoulders going up and down and all of that kind of thing. So just the act of, feet on the floor, sitting up, maybe put your hands on your stomach and inhale from below and filling up. That's what's going to make a difference in the sound that you make.
Mm-hmm.
Probably also when you speak. If you're going to speak to an auditorium full of people, it's how you take a breath. So it's what happens before that makes such a difference.
Yeah,
And
setting up
so
the note.
watching the singers helped me a lot. That was what I was mostly attracted to, the sounds that they made, and they were always so much more expressive. Listening, actually, in the old days, again, the clarinet was the least interesting of the instruments, even in Vienna in those days. Even today, today there are wonderful, even better players now than before. But you almost don't hear the clarinet in the orchestra. If you hear the flute, you hear the oboes, the oboe, and then you almost don't hear the clarinet because it doesn't have the same resonance, and that's a problem. So I was listening to the voice, and so that's what always inspired me, and what they did to make the great sounds that they made.
Amazing. Can you talk about a little bit about working with Pablo Casals at Marlborough? You in your book, there's a great description, but is there anything you want to elaborate on in terms of what it was like to be in the presence of this incredibly legendary musician?
This old guy, I mean, he inspired. He walked into the hall where we would rehearse, and people would just stand. The orchestra would stand. The Guarneri Quartet, the Juilliard Quartet, the people who made up the string section of the Marvin Bloom, the principal horn in the Cleveland Orchestra, just stood up. The audience just stood up. They didn't applaud, nothing. They just stood up. And when he came into the room,
everything stopped.
Everything stopped.
He had a charisma about him, basically. Yeah.
Well, he at that time. So I'm trying to think of the year it was. So my first years at Marlborough. So I graduated in 71. I hope I am getting this right. So I graduated in 71. It's all in a book. It's all notated.
He must have been in his 90s.
Yeah. So, but is the word existential? I mean, it was like, when he would explain, so when he would, sing, whatever he would do, silly things, the sounds that he would make, wasn't words. You couldn't even necessarily understand by the pitch what he was, but you always knew what he was taught. It was like he was just uttering this ancient kind of tribal. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, but when he started I remember the Italian Symphony, the slow movement. I mean, he made it as if it was all of our, this was our life force, and this is what the melody that we were chosen to play before we were going to die, and it became like that, and I, it just started to get very emotional about it. So it took you certainly out of where you were in terms of your life. And it was just another world kind of experience. It was just, something you just don't forget. That was one of the most amazing. Sándor Vég was another one who maybe you don't know, and a lot of people don't know, but he was a great, great violinist who existed just to make music. He had, his clothes were all wrinkled, and he had stains on his shirt, and he was fat, and he hadn't combed his hair, and he didn't care. And he would grip his bow like this, like he was holding a a stein of beer or something, and he would just play. And he didn't care so much sometimes about the complete accuracy of the pitch. I played Bartok with him. I did the contrast with him as well.
You recorded it with him.
No, he asked me to
Played it with
record
him.
with him in England, and I wasn't able to go. I wasn't able to go. I didn't have the money. Didn't have the money. So,
Gotcha.
but he was a great conductor, and if you look him up, he was much revered by great musicians at the time.
Yeah, you write about in your book that he had this kind of aspect about him where he wasn't looking for perfection. It was just like this wild abandon with which he played, but then he got the perfection anyway, because in a way he wasn't caring about perfection, but it came
Right.
anyway. So what is there something to that, not necessarily caring about perfection, but it comes
But
out that way?
I don't know about you so much, but well, again, I'm going to use a sports analogy. Boy, I'm a geek in terms of sports. You can be the greatest shooter in the world. There's a guy, his name is Stephen Curry. He was a wonderful basketball, but he's a great shooter.
Mhm.
Now, he explained that if he's at the free throw line and he's thinking, wow, I've made 50 shots in a row from this. If he starts thinking about things like that, he'll miss for sure. But he gets into more of a zone in terms of doing what he needs to do. And I know I've that way with, playing music. Sometimes I just say, okay, well, I know that it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes before we would go out to play, I would say to my colleagues in Orpheus, no matter what happens out there, we'll still be friends, right? Just to kind of make a joke of, okay, anything can happen. Let's just go and we're going to have some fun. And we would have better success being relaxed and not caring so much about every little thing. It's a way to be able to just be more natural. It's a more natural, again, nothing takes the place of just being fastidious about preparation. That's really important, as you know. But then you can't be thinking about, easier said than done, right? But the more relaxed you can be, the better. At least for me, that's just the way it works. And it seems to be something that works that way with some other musicians that I've played with.
So is it really just being in the moment, like every note as it comes, not worrying about the note coming up or the note that happened a minute ago, Is it...
It's about the music. It's just about the music. I mean, working with Menuhin, it was really about the music. It was just really about being in the head of the composer. What was it about? First movement is about war and bombs going off and being scary and all this kind of stuff, and being frightened of all the dissonance and ugliness that it could be. And then the slow movement is very kind of Eastern European mysticism. And the last movement is a rollicking kind of a gypsy dance. And so you just completely get involved, whatever it is that you're playing, with the script, the thing that is going to really, that the composer is trying to convey with what he or she wrote.
Yeah, and that word script is so interesting because you talk about that a little bit with Professor Yetzel. He would turn the notes into a script, right? Almost like a movie script. Yeah.
Right. This is your part. This is
Yeah.
this is the part that you're playing. This is what the piece is about, and to yeah, right.
And you mentioned Menuhin, and you played a concert Carnegie Hall with Menuhin and Sandor, correct?
Yeah, Georgi Sandor.
Yeah, you played contrast at Carnegie Hall, and it was packed.
And yeah, Stern, Guarneri played on all who's who of New York.
Yeah.
Isaac Stern, Guarneri Quartet, Yehudi Menuhin, and David Singer, and then it's all this stuff. It's like, how the hell did I get in there?
So what was that like to, you're on stage at Carnegie Hall, it's packed, and you're playing a trio, extremely exposed. What is that like?
There's a lot of thought that goes into it beforehand. This is where my kind of mantra or whatever, score, SCORE, self-discipline, practice, practice, practice. C, concentrate on sending negative energy away. O, optimism, expect to succeed, be thinking about other things that you've done that you've been successful at. R, relaxation from fear. It's not going to help you to go out there being afraid. It's not going to help. And E, enjoyment, love what you do. And probably for, I don't remember exactly now, what, a month or 2 months, when I would go to sleep at night, I would picture myself being backstage, nervous, and about to go on with Yehudi Menuhin. This was before we had a rehearsal. I would picture it, and I was going to be excited, and I was going to go out there, and we were going to bow together, and we were going to play this piece, and it's going to be great. It's going to be exciting. Every night, I would go through this kind of thing, and I'll be damned if it almost didn't work like that. The only thing that was really strange was the walk. I'd played there by then a few times in Carnegie, and when with Orpheus or other groups, other orchestras, you're just sitting on the stage and you're waiting for the conductor to come out and to play, right? But with Orpheus, of course, we would take the stage and sit down and play. So when I was walking in line with Orpheus to get out and play, it took a certain amount of time, but I was surrounded by a lot of people. This time when I was playing with Menuhin and Georgi Sander, it was like a miracle. I mean, I had to walk. It was like you walked forever to get to the middle of the stage. And that kind of unnerved me, like, holy Jesus, this is a long way to the middle of the stage. And you don't rehearse that. When you're rehearsing there, you have a rehearsal maybe before the concert, you're just there. But you don't ever go through the experience of going from backstage at Carnegie Hall to walking. And it seemed like it took forever to get to my chair and my stand. That kind of unnerving. But then after that, you just kind of, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to do.
And when you visualize, did you visualize the result, or did you visualize the music as it went forward? Or was it really just the experience, the result? Both. Okay.
It was all about the music. It's all about the music and not thinking about anything else. Because I believe, that was a time when I was doing other things too.
Yeah.
I was doing things. I got my real job as a professor in '89. So I started with driving the cabs 1980, '81, and did it for a while, and did other things, sold telephone rests. So between that and driving a cab and selling welding rod, I was doing other things for quite a long time. A lot of the time between 1980 and 89.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what you visualized before that concert came true, basically.
It came true. And later, when I was playing concerto, Robert Aldridge, who won a Grammy for an opera he wrote, which I'm trying to think of, The Evangelist, and around the Depression time. Anyway, I forgot the name of it. But he wrote me a piece, and then I was going to play. I played it with Orpheus, premiered it with Orpheus on the East Coast, and then with the LA Chamber Orchestra on the West Coast. Before those performances as well, standing in front of those groups, not so easy to do. Mm-hmm. And so I always like company to play with, chamber music, playing in an orchestra. And then here you are, suddenly I'm standing there. I had to put myself through a kind of psychological, training to really, and that score happened to work for me.
And so you didn't just visualize it once or twice. You spent weeks and months visualizing it every single day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Not a long time. Didn't take a long time. Could be a minute. Could be 5 minutes. But just the exercise of, I'm going to be ready. I'm going to be excited. I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to be excited. And I'm prepared. And then the other S is the discipline to practice, but everything else, C-O-R-E, it all has to do with different the games in a way that you're playing with yourself. You know, that negative energy, sending it away, thinking positively, you know, thinking about things that you are able to do, relaxation from fear, don't be afraid. This is, you know, what you're practicing for. All of that, love what you do, all of that really helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. And great lesson for people. Spend some time visualizing.
Yeah.
One thing I want to ask you was about a tenor that you went to Curtis with, and you met with him 20 years later, and he was still waiting for that phone call that would change everything for him, right?
Yeah.
And by that point, you had gotten the call for Orpheus, right? And that changed your life to join the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. So, you know, how do you set yourself up to get that call?
Well, with Orpheus, it didn't just happen out of, you know, thin air. I think it started with getting into Curtis. I mean, there are other schools you can go to. You went to Yale, didn't you go to Yale?
Yale, yeah,
Yeah. Study with my buddy Frank Morelli.
yeah, in the
Um,
book, you know.
so getting into Curtis, making an impression on Mr. Serkin and others, going to Marlborough, doing Marlborough tours, music from Marlborough tours in New York, in and out of New York, getting reviews, all of that kind of feeds into making it possible to be asked to play with Menuhin, or to be asked to be part of the play called The Lady and the Clarinet with Stockard Channing, or to be ultimately asked to play with the Chamber Music Society, or to be part of Orpheus. Now, in the beginning, when I got the call from Orpheus, everybody, we were playing for free. Members were playing for free. Subs were getting paid. So it wasn't such a great, wow. It's not like my horn player friend who got cats. Of course, they didn't know at the time how long it was going to last, right? But it ended up being huge. It wasn't like getting calls from the New York Philharmonic saying, you know, oh, you're going to play principal bassoon. Boom, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
So Orpheus was a group and turned out to be fantastic.
So you had a lot of connections, just people that you met during your career previously, and that set you up. It was just
Going to school, going to Marlborough, doing tours, doing concerts at the Metropolitan Museum. Mr. Serkin, I was part of a very small group of students from Curtis that made up what they called Advanced Studies in Chamber Music. It was the first graduate program, might have been kind of unofficial at the time, but it was called the Advanced Studies in Chamber Music, and it was with our wind quintet, the Aulos Wind Quintet, the one that commissioned the Harbison Quintet, a woodwind quintet and a string quartet, and that was it. And our teachers were Moise and Saul Schoenbach and Mr. Serkin and all of these people, and so that was also part of this highly influential group supporting me. And it was very fortunate that I was there. I was in the right place at the right time. And
Yes.
that's what I came back to when I left Europe, because within months of when I came back, that's when I found out that this program was going to start up and that I was to be the clarinetist in the wind quintet that Mr. Serkin was putting together. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. So Mr. Serkin, in putting us together as a quintet, agreed to perform with us in 5 places. See if I can remember some of them: Dartmouth, University of Connecticut, the Metropolitan Museum, New England Conservatory of Music, Kennedy Center. So 5 places. He was going to perform with us in all 5 places, but all 5 had to agree to hire us for 5 consecutive years. They had to hire us for 5 consecutive years, and then we played with other great pianists for those other times. But that helped a lot, you know, and so suddenly, my name was in the New York Times quite often in getting really nice reviews. And so that's also helped set up getting these phone calls to do special things.
Hmm. So your name was out there. You just put yourself out there enough where you were just kind of known, and then you got the call.
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't stay in your bubble. Put yourself out there, and things will start to happen, in a sense, right?
Yeah, put yourself out there and yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah. Great. And joining Orpheus must have been an amazing experience. So you had a pretty early on a Deutsche Grammophon contract.
Yeah.
That was how far into the Orpheus was that where you got the.
Very early.
Hmm.
It wasn't long after we played our first concert in Carnegie Hall. I think it was 1978. Now it's possible before I had anything to do with the group that they played in Carnegie, but it didn't amount to much because we were still playing for nothing in 77, the beginning of 1978. But once that concert happened and we got a really good review, I remember us doing concerts. Um, we would go on tours that would last 6 weeks, and part of them we did concerts for the State Department. They would send us to places where we were in Calcutta in 1979, just after our embassy in Tehran was overwhelmed, and then we had to be sneaked out of Calcutta. Um, but we were out there, we were playing, we were doing all this stuff, and so you know,
Whose idea was that originally to put that group together? Was it one person or a couple people that came up with that idea?
a group of people. The person mentioned most often is his name is Julian Pfeiffer. He was a cellist, went to Juilliard. Not the greatest cellist, not the best cellist. He was the macher of the group. He was the guy that can kind of began the I don't know he had skill with negotiating, and he was the one in the beginning who set us on this track of success. I don't know of another large group from our country, chamber orchestra. Many string quartets have achieved great things, but not a chamber orchestra without the help of significant community support, perhaps from St. Paul or from LA Chamber Orchestra or whatever. We went literally a large group. At the time there's 20, but then it grew to 25, 30, 35, playing for nothing to signing one of the largest recording contracts with a major label, Deutsche Grammophon. At the time, maybe the biggest contract. We had I think we did 60 or 70 recordings with them.
It's amazing, and they're all over the place. You see them everywhere. I mean, you see them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're still playing them. So
Yeah, and I mean, I can't think of another conductorless orchestra before Orpheus. Where did that model come from? This idea to not have a conductor?
many centuries ago. I mean,
Uh-huh.
there used to be a tradition. I guess one of them was somebody who, there's a story that he would pound his metal rod or something on the floor, and he did his foot in, and then he had terrible things happened as a result.
Yeah.
But there was a tradition. There was a tradition of conductorless chamber orchestras. And then, of course, many years ago, I Musici, but that was different because Pina Carmarelli would lead from the concertmaster position. So that's kind of normal almost.
Hmm.
But now, even when we were going strong in the 80s, 90s, other groups started to come up.
Yeah. 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 I
In
mean,
the sort of inspired a Far Cry, the group from Boston.
yeah.
That's a very good group. Kaleidoscope, right?
Kaleidoscope. Yeah. And there's several other.
So different things like that.
It's not the easiest thing because you kind of miss a conductor in a sense, because especially when you play music that's quite difficult in terms of tempo, it's very difficult. You really got to know your part and who else. You have to know other people's parts as well. So it's a lot harder than it looks, right?
I think with Orpheus, we had an easier time putting together the Schoenberg chamber symphonies without conductor, for instance, which has to be rather flexible, and it's romantic music in a way. But we do that better, in my opinion, than a recording of Mozart 40, which is really a romantic. And that's hard. You have somebody playing as their solo, and they're so into it, and they want to take more time, and they're not thinking about what happens next. Without a great conductor, playing a piece of romantic music is really hard. Haydn, great. Great Haydn, great Stravinsky, great Schoenberg. I'm sure great other thing. Great when we were playing with Richard Good or a wonderful Gil Shaham, great soloist, because then they kind of act as conductor and they give us this force of what to do and what they wanted from the piece. But playing a romantic work, Liebeslieder waltzes, hard, really hard to come having a really good unified conception of the piece. Really hard, much harder than the Schoenberg. It's very explicit, who's got the main voice, now the secondary voice, all of this kind of stuff. It's very explicit. So anyway, that was our experience with the kind of what we did well and what we didn't, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's amazing legacy that you have left behind. I mean, those Orpheus recordings are incredible, honestly. I mean, they're just amazing stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing to have taken part in that. Another recording that you took part in was, and I feel like this is one of the best recordings of Summertime that I've ever heard, with Kathleen Battle. You took part in that. Yeah, can you talk about what it was like to work with Kathleen Battle a little bit, and what that recording was like?
That was funny. Well, that was a funny story.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that I got involved with. It was the Orchestra of St. Luke's. That was that with Orpheus, and Andre Previn was the conductor. I got a phone call and asked me to do that, and I got to play a bunch with St. Luke's. That was a lot easier group to play with because they always had there was a conductor. Always, there wasn't so much tension. You were hired as first or second, and it was very explicit. With Orpheus, it was like, well, you might be playing first on this piece, but the person sitting with you is also a member, and they wanted to play that piece, and they should play that piece, and who plays it better than them? And they, this kind of, so there was this weirdness that many of us felt. I felt it was a flaw with Orpheus myself, that both people, 2 clarinets, 2 oboes, 2 French horns, whatever, both were so-called equal. And I thought it was a mistake. I thought St. Luke's did a better job of having a first and a second, but that's not the way Orpheus was. But anyway, and I forgot what you asked me.
The Kathleen Battle recording.
What was it like Kathleen Battle. So it was easy. Battle. So I was playing first. So
yeah.
So we did it many times, just one song. She did a whole thing. It's called Honey and Rue, the album, and you can get it on YouTube. It's still there.
Really good. Yeah.
Such an unbelievable voice. And I remember she was behind me, and there weren't a lot of us doing this particular song. And I remember that I had friends who wanted to come to the rehearsal. We did it at just north of New York City. It was a festival, summer festival. Anyway, big theater, huge, row upon row upon row, probably 100 rows back, and large theater. And some of my friends were sort of 20 rows, 25 rows back. And before we started our rehearsal, it wasn't even a recording session, she looked out and then she whispered, she asked for her manager to come and she whispered in his ear and he came out and he said, you need to move way back to the back because Miss Battle doesn't want you around. So that was fine. So anyway, we did this and she was very demanding and we did the recording, we did the rehearsals and then we did the recording. And then when it was all finished, the whole album, I remember I was packing up my clarinets, and because Miss Battle was near me, I was able to listen to the conversation, and Previn went up to her and said, you know, you have the most amazing, she did and does have such an incredibly clear, beautiful, round, just the most exquisite voice that I'd ever heard. And it's in the back of my head, I can still hear it. So he would say, you have the most beautiful voice, you're a wonderful musician, and you're the biggest bitch I ever worked with. And she went, hey, I know.
She didn't take
And
it personally.
that's the way she was, you know.
I mean, did you, you know, during that recording process, did you see her make mistakes? Like, or is there a process that she has to go through to get things perfect, or was she just perfect from the beginning, or did you see the mistakes?
She had a very high level,
Mm-hmm.
very high level. So the things for her that were unacceptable, I don't remember her making any big mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But for her, they were like, oh my God, that's just completely unacceptable. Or she wouldn't like what somebody else did in the orchestra or something like that. And so we would stop for that. But mostly it was about her.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was really hard to, you know, to tell exactly, well, what does she want? I mean, it sounds fine. Sounds okay to me, you know? So
Yeah.
that was the way she was a real perfectionist.
Couple more things I just wanted to ask you real
Sure.
quick. So there's a really great, interesting passage here that I thought was very interesting on page 304 of your book, towards the end.
Yeah.
Really long book. It's amazing that you put this all together. But there's one sentence I just want to read here. It says here, so it also feels like I am acknowledging to God that I am fully fulfilling my duty to nurture my talent whenever possible and to share it with others. And I thought that was just really interesting. You know, can you talk about that a little bit in terms of just realizing what God's plan is for you? And then is that what success is really? Just kind of, you know, realizing God's plan for you and then actualizing it in the world? You know, what does that have to do with your career and what you were put on the earth to do?
Huh. It's a really good question. You know, I'm not thinking at all about my career anymore.
Yeah.
So once I left the East Coast, I left Montclair State. I left as a full professor, and I quit. I mean, nobody does that. Who quits as a professor of music? You know, it's crazy. But I mean, there were personal reasons for it. My wife at the time was basically dying, and we wanted to get home, and so that. But since I left in 2012, and then I would go back and play a couple more years with Orpheus up to maybe 2013, 14. But after that, even then, I wasn't really thinking so much about my career. So here I am. I'm in you know, in this over 55 community, and I have a room full of CDs and posters and pictures and stuff. And people are asking me to teach and to play and that kind of stuff, and I'm really grateful. So now I have some time to think about, so what am I supposed to do now? And what do I do with this? What do I do with what I have and what I can still do? What do I do with that? And so it gives me a purpose. My daughter lives close by, and I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy, you know, obviously very happily, you know, married. I'm very happy about that. What is my purpose in terms of my work? So I've had opportunities to play for people who are shut-ins, using my ability to play, or during COVID, give concerts on my porch, and people would sit distances away from each other, or go into a hospice and play for a neighbor's father who's dying. I find that gives me purpose, and it makes sense to me that this is what I do. It's not towards building a career anymore. It's just kind of it's what I can do. It's something that apparently people like, and even writing. I mean, who knows if anything's going to happen with that? But it gives me pleasure to give others pleasure, some solace, some peace, and so if I can do that, then it has a kind of maybe a religious context, but nothing specific. It's just I think that this is why this was what I was supposed to do, and so I'm fulfilling what I perceive as God, or that person's plan for me of what I'm supposed to do. And then hopefully, as long as I keep doing it, I'll be around for a while.
I think so. And that gave you the wherewithal and the willpower to push through those pitfalls, right? Because it is what you're supposed to do. And you have that backing in a sense, right?
I guess so.
Yeah. So it helped you to keep going in a way. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much, David. And do you have a website, by the way?
My website is singerclarinet.com.
Singerclarinet.com.
And here's my book.
Here's your book. And
you're looking at it upside down or something.
Get it on Amazon. It's great. There's a lot of...
From Cab Driver to Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. But from singerclarinet.com, you can get the information that you need to get it. And I'm going to be doing on the 25th of this month. I'm doing a radio program up in Santa Barbara. I'm doing a bunch of other things that will be from the website announced, and also some Facebook as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really enjoyed the book. Highly recommend that you go out and get it, whoever's listening. And amazing. So thanks so much for doing this, David. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you.
Had a great time.